I think right now, though, we're going to be discussing a little Bengals talk here. And Tee
Bengals.
Higgins and his the rumors are that he's getting tagged, at least from The Athletic, is what it's been reported. Trace, your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't have. You're Casey. You've forgotten more about the Bengals' decision makings in the front office than I've ever remembered. So the thing about the situation that I think most people are trying to figure out one way or the other, if they have a strong opinion one way or the other, is that you don't want to find yourself in a position where you have Tee Higgins again, and you get nothing in return if he decides to walk. So if you don't extend Tee Higgins, which I don't know, that's maybe, I don't say a better question, but does it seem like a foregone conclusion now that Tee Higgins is not going to get extended? You're going to have to let him walk based off the amount of money he's going to ask for, and he's just the odd man out because Jamar Chase is, let's face it, Jamar Chase is a generational talent. And that doesn't take anything away from Tee Higgins. I think Tee Higgins is a great receiver as well, but he also is coming off of a year where I think most would consider it a disappointment, right? Like there was times this year where Bengals fans were, not done with T, but they're quote unquote pretty upset with T. And he missed a few games. You add in the fact that obviously Joe got hurt, so that probably didn't help the cause either. You tag him, and then what do you do? That's the question.
If I may, I'll say this again. I love T. I wish he would stay here, but we had a clear issue last year defensively, and you're not going to be able to help the defense if you're paying Tee Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow. It just can't happen. It's not mathematically possible. I found this little nugget yesterday. So when the Bengals went to the Super Bowl in 21, the trio of Joe Burrow, Chase, and Higgins, they totaled $15.8 million against the cap. That's 8.1% of their total cap space, only 8.1. After tagging Higgins, the trio will carry a total cap hit of $61 million. That is 24.2% of their total cap space. And that's before the Jamar Chase extension. That number could exceed $70 million. So this is not one of those things where you can rationalize bringing everybody back. It can't happen. It's not the way the sport works. If this was the MLB and we were the Yankees, then maybe. But you're going to have to upgrade the defense. The defense needs an overhaul. It does. You can't look at what happened last year and not blame the defense for a large portion of those losses. Any quarterback in the world had 15 seconds to throw, and then every receiver. Noah Brown is still open at Paycor Stadium. Noah Brown still has not been found by a Bengals defenseman. That's a fact. And if you're going to be able to improve the roster, you can't rationalize paying Tee Higgins. And again, I'm going to bring this up too, and people aren't going to want to hear it, but Joe Burrow has been hurt. He has been. Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase are great for Joe Burrow, without question. But if Joe Burrow is unable to stay healthy, and then you're paying Tee Higgins and Jamar Chase, and it's Jake Browning throwing to them, respectfully, I don't think it's worth it. I think the only case scenario it's worth it is if Joe Burrow's there or obviously a great quarterback. Because if you can produce, you can mask some of the defensive inabilities with offense. You can. The Chiefs did it a couple years ago. If you score 35 points a game, your defense doesn't have to be the 2000s Ravens with Ray Lewis. It doesn't have to be that. But right now you're at a point where our offense went in and out at various points during last season and ended up not being the world's worst offense. But again, there were games where they just completely disappear. And you can't have it all the ways in the world. You can't have the world's best offense and the world's best defense always. Sometimes it happens. The Chiefs, again, had a great defense this year, lacked a little bit offensively. Ravens, same kind of deal. But 49ers might be an exception because that roster was perfect. They still can't win, though. I would argue that you're gonna tag Tee Higgins and you're gonna try your best to trade him. You're gonna try your damnedest to trade him because I have a hard time believing you're gonna let that guy just walk out of here and getting nothing in return. No value to help replace him.
Honestly, I think it really just boils down to how they would structure T's contract if they were ever going to get an extension done. More than likely, they're only tagging him because they haven't figured out those details out. They haven't been able to square that away just yet with him. also at the same time, you're thinking about trying to pay Jamar Chase. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Jamar Chase got figured out first before Tee Higgins, and then they ended up signing Tee Higgins to a deal. Maybe even both at the same time. Like, those two seem like they're kind of a tandem in determining what gets done actually first. I feel like if they can figure out Jamar Chase's contract, they can add that extra year of his fifth-year deal onto that new contract that he'll sign, kind of like what they did with Joe Burrow, that you could theoretically front-load Tee Higgins' contract to where you can fit both those guys at the same time. Now, yes, you are probably sacrificing a position of need somewhere else, but the Bengals have managed just fine with some of those sacrifices throughout the last couple of seasons. I mean, they've made it to the AFC Championship game, and we didn't know where they would go this year, but they had a pretty damn good roster. Absolutely destroyed the 49ers. They had a really good shot, in my opinion, of at least making it to the divisional round in this playoffs, and maybe even past that. But what ifs and nuts and butts and candy, whatever.
Nuts and bolts were, what was it? If
onlys and buts were candies and nuts, then every day would be Ernta Dankfest.
But
that's your take.
But regardless, I think that Tee Higgins getting the tag doesn't necessarily mean that he won't get a contract. That's what I would say. I think that just means that it's prolonging the process. There's plenty of instances around the league where a guy has been tagged and then immediately given a contract. Actually, Chris Jones just had something similar happen to him just last season. He was given a franchise tag, and they restructured it to be a 2-year deal, a pseudo 1-year deal where you added a year on the back end that would extend out that contract. I could see something similar happening to T, where we give him a franchise tag, we figure out Jamar Chase's contract, and then we restructure Tee Higgins' franchise tag into an actual deal that allows him for both those guys to stay, and it makes sense.
Since Jamar, and this is where maybe I probably need to do a little more homework on how the NFL's contracts work, but I think Jamar, since he's made Pro Bowls in 2 seasons, there's incentives there to where I believe he's getting paid some more. I also believe that Jamar's in a spot where if I were Jamar and I was in his camp, I would like to make sure that the market gets set by Justin Jefferson first before I did a deal.
Yeah, I mean, Justin Jefferson just recently came out and said that he doesn't want to sign anywhere until the Vikings figure out a quarterback situation, which, I mean, that could be until the draft, which at that point, free agency's done. So I don't know what the point of doing that all is, but yeah, I mean, like, I think in Jamar Chase's best interest is to wait. And same thing with Justin Jefferson. I think those two will probably be at a standstill for a large majority of this free agency, unless, like I said before, they kind of do this deal with both these guys at the same time, figure each other's contracts out first, and then maybe they, like let's just say Tee Higgins gets the franchise tag and that's it. I would want to trade him. I don't think that makes sense. But I do think if they were able to sign both guys to long-term deals and they worked out a way to like front load one guy's contract and back load the other guy, then yeah, I'd be all for that.
Is it a relative, and this is where I'm just asking a question before I get burned in the chat. I'm just asking a question. Is it of a relative concern, though, that you're trying to overpay, and overpay is not the right word, but you're paying premium dollars towards positions that you've had already, and you've not really had an elite offense for it?
Yeah, that's true too. I would say that is more of a concern about our offensive line.
That's
I think
fair.
the line has been the major concern in terms of where all the money's going, and it's not producing the way that we thought. Tee Higgins and Jamar have been very valuable considering that they've been on their rookie contracts and both have put up 1,000-yard seasons together for last couple seasons. It makes more sense to me to sign those guys because you know what you got there. But at the same time, too, Bengals have historically been really, really good at drafting receivers. They've been really good at developing receivers. And if I were the GM, I was basing my take off of them pretty much confirming that they're going to tag T. I wouldn't even have tagged T. I probably would have just tried to sign him to a deal now or trade him. Those are my two options. The tag to me is too much money. I'd rather go get a Chris Jones. I'd rather go get a Leonard Williams, a Christian Wilkins to shore up the defensive tackle spot, get a pass rusher. The other thing, too, that we really haven't discussed much in the Bengals community is that the right tackle spot in free agency is bare. It is very bare. I mean, Jonah Williams is the top tackle, basically, the best young tackle in the free agency class. And you might have to pay him if you want to have similar, or if you want to have decent talent there. Otherwise, you're going to have another guy that's just a rotating door for the next couple seasons until you figure out the draft, in which, again, we've had this discussion too. You got to get that right, and we haven't been able to get an offensive lineman right in years. So that's another tough part to this equation is, do you even want to give T the franchise tag? Because it's cheaper to give Jonah Williams the franchise tag.
City would lose their minds if that happened.
Yeah, I think the city loses their minds if that happens, Casey, because ultimately at the end of the day, Jonah Williams doesn't have a very positive outlook in this city. Regardless, I actually think that Jonah Williams is probably better than what the city wants to act like, right? I mean, he's been drilled so much, and some of that's to his own doing because he's acted like he didn't want to move spots, and it became, is he a team guy, not a team guy? But he's, like you said, the best available right tackle in free agency. It all comes down to, and we've talked about this at length, it all comes down to the Tee Higgins and the Tee Higgins situation here before we move forward is this. What do you get in return for Tee Higgins if you trade him that we don't ultimately end up knowing, right? Yeah. And secondary part of that is that we would all agree that you would be willing to trade pretty much anything and everything for a Super Bowl.
I would.
And I think that's – what?
I would.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think everybody would. I thought you said you wouldn't. I was like,
I would.
Man, we got another hour show. But I'm saying that's part of the problem when you're inside of a front office like the Bengals right now. And I know that Joe Burrow said his window is his whole career, and I get what he was saying with that, and that's a fair statement. And I'm not sitting here debunking that or saying that that's not true. But there are certain windows of opportunities to have guys that are really, really good. That obviously you can't ultimately keep, that are going to have to go away, and you can try to kick the can down the road is not the right term to use here, but ultimately you're probably sacrificing the opportunity maybe to have something on the back end in a few years from now based off the trade that you would have made for Tee Higgins. But you could also say, you know what? We think we have just as good of a shot as anybody in the NFL to win the Super Bowl this next year, and Tee Higgins is a big part of that. That is a dynamic or a situation that is very, very tough to manage. Because if the Bengals win the Super Bowl, nobody cares that they didn't trade T. Nobody cares that ultimately they didn't get the right value out of T and they just let him walk in free agent, a la Jesse Bates. But if you don't win, then you're in a spot where it's like, okay, you kind of you spent your money, and now you're looking behind, and you realize you ain't got no money left, per se, and you still need to go buy some goods.
Yeah, I mean, the inevitable thing that you're trying to portray here is, I mean, you could use that money to shore up the defense, which was 30th in the league last year. I mean, that can't be denied.
But what can you do to push back on that point really quickly? And this is where being a general manager is hard. And that's where depth is a really important thing. And you got to draft well consistently in order to have a great team, as we all know, because somebody might get hurt and you got to be able to put some guy right behind him that is ready to go. And it happened to the 49ers in the Super Bowl. And arguably their best defender goes down, and they had to put in a backup. And serviceably, there wasn't a huge difference there. Now, maybe you could argue that Greenlaw would have made a play that we would have never known about because he would have been out there and not the backup. But my point to you is this, is that what do you do defensively that makes you think one or two guys that shores that whole thing up? Because the linebackers you've signed, which were a disappointment, you could argue the interior defensive line or maybe an edge rusher. Maybe Sam Hubbard isn't the guy anymore. But your back end and your secondary is relatively young to where at this point you can't just I don't want to say give up, but you can't act like those guys aren't going to be good.
Right.
They might end up being great players. You just need a little bit of time.
Yeah, but I mean, I could argue that, I mean, adding a guy of Chris Jones' caliber that's going to be on every 3 downs is going to be just so beneficial for the Bengals on defense. I mean, what he's able to provide for you. I mean, there's it depends on who we're talking about here. I mean, most people are looking at shoring up that pass rushing defensive tackle spot. Personally, I would go for another edge rusher as well. I could add another corner. Like, I know we went out and got DJ Turner in the second round last year, but could you imagine him being your third corner? I mean, that's like, could you get a Jalen Ramsey type corner in the draft, or Patrick Surtain or something like that in free agency this year? I don't quite remember who's all available in the corners, but I know it's a really talented defensive class this year in free agency, and they've got a lot of money to be able to try to shore up some of the holes that are on the roster. That's what I feel like they should do. I feel like you should trust in the Bengals should trust in their abilities to draft and develop receivers, do what they've done for years now at this point, and let T either be traded or walked. To me, the money is more important. Being able to structure a team to shore up as many holes as possible is more important than making the receiving class, or this receiving depth that we've had for years, stay the same, because it's not really provided any fruit other than losing a Super Bowl, I guess. I don't know.
Getting the Super Bowl is an accomplishment, but I get your point. I really, again, not to quote Billy Beane all the time, but if you don't win the last game of the season, nobody cares.
Yeah, like, if you believe in Joe Burrow, like, he is that dude that his window is his entire career. That's basically what Mahomes just did, right? I mean, his entire career is going to be a Super Bowl window. He did it with literally no receiver help.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I think what happens is you have a situation now where, do you want to try to replicate, or do you want to try to do what the Chiefs did, which is seemed crazy at the time, and it continues to seem somewhat crazy because Tyreek Hill seems like a generational talent. Tyreek Hill seems like
a Hall of Famer,
a Hall of Fame player. Immediately makes a team significantly better on the offensive side of the ball, and they got rid of him. They got rid of him.
Yeah.
It allowed them, obviously, to go out and maybe do some things that, and I don't pay attention to the Chiefs enough to be able to sit here and talk specifically about what they did. But ultimately, if you have a defense like the Chiefs had, and you have a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, and you have a quarterback like Joe Burrow, is what you're arguing, is that really, I'm not saying you could throw anybody out there, but it seems that if you have a competent system with a great quarterback, they can make it work.